Hey, welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started on the first panel. Looking forward to this one. It's going to be on South and Central Asia, expanding economies and the ramifications of the Middle East. And I'm going to introduce our panelists. First of all, to discuss Middle East and India relations will be Ambassador Kenneth Juster, Distinguished Fellow with the Council on Foreign Relations. To discuss Middle East and Pakistan relations will be my good friend I can't remember my writing, I apologize. Distinguished Senior Fellow, the Middle East Institute, Jerry Firestein. And then also to discuss Turkey and Central Asia relations will be Dr. Hakan Yavuz, Professor of Political Science at the University of Utah. And moderating it will be my good friend and colleague and co-conspirator of this event, Dr. Sabri Atesh, Associate Professor of History here at the William B. Clements Department of History at SMU. Sabri.
Hello, everybody, and I'm glad you are here. We are really in for a treat. We have rarely had such a distinguished group of speakers to come and talk to us about the topic that we, as we saw with the keynote address, not usually are exposed to. So I'm very honored to have our distinguished guests. I'll be a little bit of a small dictator, but a generous one with our time. I'll try to give them a good amount of time to speak, and then we will go through our questions. And according to our program, our first speaker will be Ambassador Kenneth Juster, and as you know, he's going to talk about India and the Middle East. Please welcome Ambassador Juster.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here at SMU for this conference. And as you heard in the keynote presentation, there's a long history to the relationships between countries in Asia and those in the Middle East. I'm going to speak about that from the perspective of India and first touch on its historical relationship with the Middle East, or what it calls West Asia. Then talk about the changes that occurred after India became independent in 1947. And then a series of other changes after the Cold War ended, and especially when Narendra Modi became Prime Minister in 2014, and then conclude with some brief remarks on how India is dealing with the conflict in Gaza. The centrality of India in the British Empire led to a deep set of commercial and military connections between India and the Middle East from the 17th to the 20th century. Until the middle of the 20th century, 1947, when India became independent, it played a key role in the British domination of the Indian Ocean and its adjacent areas, and it provided a base from which Britain could control and defend its empire and sustain a regional security border. Trade between the Indian subcontinent and the Middle East facilitated the exchange of goods and knowledge throughout and across continents. And this included the map you saw of the spice routes that went through India, connecting East and West. So India's westward engagement, or engagement in this region they call West Asia, is nothing new. It's been there for centuries. But after India's independence in 1947 and during the Cold War, its relations with the Middle East were greatly reduced and subsided for a variety of reasons. Post-independence, India sought to distance itself from the period of the British rule. It deliberately renounced a security role in the region and abandoned the central role in the Indian Ocean's economic globalization. This was consistent with the ideology that India espoused of non-alignment and of an emphasis on economic autarky as its economy turned inward. India also tended to view the Middle East through a religious lens, in which its own partition along religious lines reinforced this vision, and Pakistan's outreach to the Middle East in terms of seeking Islamic solidarity complicated any diplomatic strategy by India in the Gulf. At the time, this was probably an overestimation of the religious factor in terms of its effect on the Gulf states and an underestimation of the depth of goodwill of the Arabian Peninsula for India and the desire for greater cooperation, but I'll touch on that later. Instead, India preferred to engage the secular socialist regimes in the region, such as Egypt and Iraq, rather than the conservative religious kingdoms such as Saudi Arabia. In addition, Prime Minister Nehru, who was the first Prime Minister of India, and his successors embraced the era's ideological themes, especially for the less developed world, of anti-Zionism and of support for the Palestinian cause. Thus, India kept its distance from the United States, from Israel, and from the countries in the Persian Gulf, which India viewed as being too close to Pakistan and the United States. In fact, the United States worked with Pakistan in creating something called the Central Organization as a southern flank against Russian or Soviet expansion. Now, India did establish relations with Israel in 1992, but its support for the Palestinian cause limited any overt engagement with the Israelis. Post-Cold War, things began to change and go back to somewhat like the historical circumstance that had existed. And this especially was accelerated with Prime Minister Modi's entry into office in 2014. New Delhi's reinvigorated engagement with the Middle East reflected a deeper and ongoing shift in India's external engagement at large. And it includes a more assertive and muscular foreign policy that is more strategic in its approach and less piecemeal. Embedded within this is the fact that India is aligning more closely with the United States. Prime Minister Modi has focused on raising India's profile in the world and widening its foreign policy footprint beyond its immediate neighborhood. It first spoke of a look east policy to deal with countries in Southeast Asia and East Asia. Now it has a think west policy for the Middle East. And all of this has coincided with India's continual rise economically. If we can step back for a moment and just briefly discuss India's broader foreign policy orientation. As I mentioned, during the Cold War, they had a policy of non-alignment that has evolved to what they now refer to as strategic autonomy in what they hope will be a multipolar world. They seek good relations with all countries. Ideally, they would be equidistant relations, but as I mentioned, India is moving closer to the United States, due in large part to its strategic challenge presented by the rise of China. In some respects, India is also building on U.S. strategic interests in the Middle East, and I'll get to that in a moment. But the big story is that it's coming back to this region as an independent actor with political agency of its own. There's also an ideological component to what India is doing as well, and I'll touch on that in a minute. The logic of India's geography, as I said, is coming back into view. And as you saw on the map, India really sits at the fulcrum of Asia and in the heart of the Indian Ocean region. And it is well placed to shape geopolitical outcomes both in East Asia and in the Middle East. And it's returning to both. And in East Asia, it has joined a grouping called the Quad with the United States, India, Japan, and Australia. And I'll get to shortly a regional grouping that is formed in the West with Israel, India, the United States, and the United Arab Emirates. India's engagement post-Cold War has focused on energy, or initially focused on energy trade and people-to-people contacts. India imports about 80% of its oil consumption, and the Middle East remains key to India's energy security, notwithstanding the surge in imports it has gotten from discounted Russian crude in recent months. The Gulf states have also emerged as key sources of investment in India's energy sector, which has helped to boost India's prominence as a refining hub. On the economic front, there are over 8 million, some people say as many as 9 million Indians working in the Gulf. And that accounts for about 30% of the remittances that India receives from those living overseas and sending it back home. And this is significant because India is actually the world's leading remittance recipient. In more recent years, what's changed is that these interactions have been supplemented by more diversified economic exchanges, deepened security cooperation, and a shift away from a piecemeal or transactional approach to a more strategic one. While the importance of the region as a source of oil imports and foreign remittances remains, this has been subsumed, as I mentioned, in a more strategic engagement. Moreover, one of Prime Minister Modi's first acts was to formally and overtly embrace Israel as an important partner and to highlight that relationship, not to manage it covertly, but doing it openly. Indian-Israeli relations have been driven in part by pragmatic considerations rooted in Israel's growing strategic importance to India's defense sector and its technology sector, as well as the close relationship that both countries have with the United States. Under the Modi government, there were also, as I indicated earlier, some ideological considerations that have gained significance because the BJP party, of which Prime Minister Modi is the leader, sees a mutual affinity between India and Israel as religious nationalist states facing an existential threat from Islamic extremism. Modi was the first Indian prime minister to visit Israel. He did it in 2017. And consistent with his policy of trying to be friends with all, 6 months later, he went to the West Bank and met with Palestinians as well. But then in 2018, Prime Minister Netanyahu came for the first visit to India. I was in India at the time. And at that point, in January 2018, the two countries signed 9 agreements in various sectors, including cybersecurity, oil and gas, solar energy, space science, air transport, medicines, and film production. And they've also been engaged in free trade negotiations. Another shift is Modi's enthusiasm for engaging the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. Under the Prime Minister, New Delhi figured out that there was much that could be done to build commercial, political, and security partnerships, and discovered, as I mentioned earlier, the Gulf states were more practical, less ideological than had perhaps initially been assumed. Prime Minister Modi was the first Indian Prime Minister to visit the UAE in over 30 years. And since being Prime Minister, he's made 7 visits to the UAE and 15 visits to the Middle East region more broadly. As was mentioned in the introductory keynote, India concluded a comprehensive economic partnership agreement with the UAE in 2022, and then in 2024, they concluded a bilateral investment agreement. Now, while oil trade remains a key component of the bilateral relationship, the economic engagement has diversified into many other areas, including fintech, clean energy, food security, education, and artificial intelligence. Modi also, and this is quite surprising, and no one could have expected this years earlier, inaugurated a new and very large Hindu temple in Abu Dhabi in February of this year, something you never would have anticipated seeing years ago. He also made a visit to Qatar in February 2024. I believe he's made 2 visits there, shortly before the release of 8 former Indian naval personnel who had been sentenced to death for alleged espionage. And that also reflects New Delhi's growing clout in the region that they were able to get the sentences for these individuals commuted and get them returned home. At the same time, when he visited Doha, there was an agreement between India's Petronet and Qatar Energy that extended a previous contract for 20 years in which Qatar will supply India with 7.5 million tons of liquefied natural gas. The last decade has also seen the expansion of counterterrorism collaboration between India on the one hand and the UAE and Saudi Arabia on the other. Indeed, India's westward engagement is also emblematic of a more muscular foreign policy, This has been reflected in the Indian Navy's role in tackling the renewed threat of Somali piracy in the Gulf of Aden, as well as countering attacks by the Houthi rebels targeting commercial ships in the Red Sea. And this relates to the strategic importance of the sea lines of communication for India's trade and energy security. In the last decade, India has also established combined air, naval, and army exercises with the UAE and Oman, as well as holding multilateral naval exercises with Qatar, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia. This has helped strengthen the Indian military's interoperability with regional counterparts, as well as facilitating its emergence as a net security provider in the region. In addition to India's growing strategic engagement bilaterally, India has undertaken a growing alignment with the US-led architecture in the Middle East. We see this in the grouping I mentioned called the I2U2, India, Israel, United States, and the UAE. The rapid transformation of India's relations with Israel and the UAE has provided the basis for this engagement among the four nations, facilitated by the 2020 Abraham Accords that the United States had helped have normalization of relations among Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and then later some others. While this Middle East Quad has prioritized non-military themes such as coordinating on energy, climate, trade, it does not take away from the fact that India is expanding bilateral defense cooperation with the United States, with Israel, and with the UAE. The Middle East Quad can be seen as part of the effort to rearrange the regional order and balance of power, in which New Delhi returns to its more prominent role in tune with its geographic location, economic salience, and political interests. But one other regional initiative I want to mention is that India announced at the conclusion of the G20 summit that it hosted in 2023, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, otherwise known as IMEC. This seeks to be a multi-pronged network to create new transport routes and connectivity between Europe and Asia via the Middle East. The agreement involves Saudi Arabia, the European Union, India, the UAE, France, Germany, Italy, and the United States. And the IMEC is intended to foster deeper cooperation or deeper integration of economies by harmonizing regulations, facilitating cross-border investment, and promoting cross-cultural exchanges. And they're going to collaborate on initiatives in infrastructure, energy cooperation, and technological innovation. The IMEC also provides a nexus of economic potential that potentially can counterbalance the dominance of China in global trade. While these two initiatives, the I2U2 and IMEC, are primarily economic initiatives that have strong strategic underpinnings, they're aligned with broader US efforts to facilitate a rapprochement between India and the Arab states. But of course, the ongoing conflict in Gaza has delayed progress on these initiatives. And let me just conclude with a couple of comments on the Gaza situation. What's interesting is that following the October 7th terrorist attack, October 7th, 2023, Prime Minister Modi tweeted, "We stand in solidarity with Israel." This was followed by the significant action of India abstaining in the UN General Assembly resolution that condemned Israel's attacks on Gaza. And some 120 countries voted in favor of that resolution, while India was one of 45 that abstained and the only country in South Asia to do so. India also supported an amendment that explicitly condemned Hamas in its attacks on Israel. The fact that India's position was out of sync with a large part of what's known as the Global South, where India maintains leadership ambitions, is significant as it signaled the country's willingness to stick out its neck in favor of support of Israel. New Delhi has come out more strongly in recent times in support of the plight of the Palestinians in Gaza and subsequent UN General Assembly resolutions, but once again it abstained in a vote of the UN Human Rights Council in April that called for an end of arms transfers to Israel, as well as accusing Israel of war crimes. Now, when you consider the fact that India was the first non-Arab state to vote against Israel's admission to the UN in 1948, and to recognize the state of Palestine in 1988, its reaction to the hostilities of October 7th, 2023, indicates the magnitude and significance of its shift from its historical position on Israel. Thus far, India has managed to square the circle by maintaining cordial relations with both Israel and the Palestinians, as well as with other interested parties in the Gulf region, and even with Iran. But India's balancing act is only going to get more difficult as the world becomes more chaotic. And one challenge will be Prime Minister Modi's identity-driven politics, which can be divisive. And one asks the question whether it's possible for India to deepen relations with a region that is the birthplace of Islam, but there are growing instances of anti-Muslim rhetoric in India. The fact that several Arab governments have voiced concerns over Islamophobic statements and policies emanating from India suggests that this is going to be very challenging. But I would conclude by saying that for now, Delhi seems in many respects to have traded places with Pakistan, and Jerry can comment on this, in the Gulf region. As Prime Minister Modi celebrates the special relationships that he's been able to build with the Gulf, in my view, Pakistan seems to struggle to build productive engagement today with that region, in part because of its own continuing strategic decline. Stop there.
All right, we're continuing the rivalry here, going from India to Pakistan and changing roles. And now we'll have Ambassador Feinstein also actively serve in the region, right? You read in the notes that we had, as you know, Ambassador Juster was the ambassador up to very recently and was very much involved in Modi's visit here and Trump's visit to India. So we will have that in mind when we have our questions. So please go ahead.
Thank you, and thanks to SMU for hosting us on this event. And I think that Ken left with a good segue into my comments. Basically, what I would say, and when we talk about Pakistan's relations with the Middle East, we are primarily, of course, talking about the relationship between Pakistan and the 6 GCC states. That is the dominant focus of Pakistani foreign policy in the region, has been for practically the entirety of its existence, certainly since 1979 and the Iranian Revolution. It continues to this day. Fundamentally, there are several pillars that Pakistan and the GCC states have built their relationships on. First, there are the kind of the politico-religious aspects of Pakistan being a predominantly Sunni state. About 85% of Pakistanis are Sunni Muslim, as are most of the GCC populations, except for Bahrain and Oman. The second pillar has been the kind of security cooperation and the political cooperation that's been a hallmark of the relationship. And again, going back to Ken's comments, for Pakistan, of course, that has historically been fundamentally their search for support vis-a-vis their adversarial relationship with India. The importance that they've attached to getting support from the Saudis, the Emiratis, in terms of Kashmir and the other challenging aspects of the relationship with India, and the importance that the Gulf states, primarily Saudi Arabia, played in helping Pakistan overcome the effects of its conflicts with India, as well as to help mitigate some of the damaging effects of Pakistan's nuclear weapons tests that came in response to Indian testing. So that security cooperation for Pakistan has primarily historically been been focused on India, to a lesser extent on Afghanistan, but again, the support that Pakistan got from the Saudis, the Emiratis, the other GCC states during the years of the Afghan jihad in the 1980s, and subsequent to that, has been extremely important financially and in terms of the political support that they provided. Going the other way, the significance of Pakistani support for the GCC on the security cooperation, deployment of Pakistani military forces into the region, which continues till today. And as recently as 2011, when Pakistan provided military assistance for Bahrain when they're putting down anti-government demonstrations in the Arab Spring. One area of some friction between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia on the security front came in 2015 when the Pakistanis declined a Saudi request that they deploy forces with the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen. But they have managed to overcome that. And as we saw the appointment of General Raheel, the former Chief of Army Staff in Pakistan, to lead the multinational Saudi-led counterterrorism initiative is an indication that they managed to resolve that. But Pakistan's role as a guarantor of GCC security, particularly again in this context in regard to Iranian threats, has been something that has been very significant over the years. And then the third kind of pillar of Pakistan GCC relations has been in the area of financial assistance, remittances. Again, Pakistan, like India, Pakistan has about 5 million people working as expatriate laborers. They generate about $20 billion in remittances on an annual basis. This is an extremely important element of Pakistan's economy, of their GDP. And equally important has been the continued assistance of the GCC states in providing financial support, balance of payment support, deposits in the Pakistan Central Bank over the years that have helped stabilize the Pakistani economy and opened up the door to IMF and other kinds of international assistance. So again, that's been a central component of the Pakistan GCC relationship. So all three of those pillars still remain in place to a certain extent. None of them has disappeared. Pakistan is an important member in the Organization of the Islamic Conference, continues to participate in other Saudi-led initiatives that are built around religious identity, religious activities, and that continues to promote Sunni policies around the world, particularly in the Middle East and in the Islamic world. Pakistan continues its military presence in the region. Outside of the US and the UK, Pakistan is one of the key security partners for the GCC states. They participate in a number of multilateral exercises, other kinds of operations. They continue to maintain a troop presence in Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, in Qatar, and elsewhere. We've seen over the past months that the GCC states have continued to provide critical financial assistance to Pakistan. Their commitments for deposits in the Pakistan Central Bank opened the door to a $6 billion IMF loan that was just completed earlier this year. And so that continues to be a major aspect of Pakistani policy, Pakistani financial health. But the core point that I wanted to make in this talk was that despite all of these elements, despite the fact that there is an awful lot of continuity in Pakistan's relations with the GCC, in fact, broader regional dynamics have brought about critical changes in the way both Pakistan and its GCC partners approach the relationship, and what are the opportunities as well as some of the challenges that the two sides are going to face going forward. One aspect is that growing populations in the region, particularly in Saudi Arabia, have led to pressures domestically in those countries to do more to employ their own young men and women coming into the labor force, and that's going to put pressure and squeeze opportunities for expatriate laborers going forward. And that is a reality that growing demographic as well as a rise in economic nationalism throughout the GCC is going to affect the ability of outside partners, whether it's Pakistan or India or Bangladesh or anybody else, to continue sending expatriate workers to those countries. But also beyond that, the important changes in regional dynamics are changing the strategic calculations, particularly for the GCC countries. And one of the things that we saw, so if you look at the Abraham Accords as one aspect of it, as well as the outreach to Iran and the ability or the willingness of GCC, primarily Saudi UAE, but even Bahrain, to open new channels of communication to Iran, which reflects a broader regional change, concerns about the willingness of the U.S. To continue to play the very active defense and security role that it's played historically in the region, and really beginning in 2019. When both the UAE and Saudi Arabia were attacked by Iran and were disappointed in what they felt was an insufficient U.S. show of support for them as response, led them to open up dialogues first with between UAE and Iran, and then subsequently between Saudi Arabia and Iran, to try to reduce tensions in the region. And to emphasize resolution of disputes through diplomatic engagement as opposed to military security confrontation. And that is still a critical element in terms of the changing dynamic in those countries. And there is a correlation, there's a relationship between what's happening domestically in these societies, particularly against Saudi Arabia, and this desire to reduce tensions, to establish relations with former adversaries, whether it's Israel or Iran, because if you look at Vision 2030 in Saudi Arabia or their counterpart plans in the other GCC states, they all emphasize the significance, the importance of addressing domestic economic challenges. And the way to do that is to reduce their defense requirements, to reduce the security threats that they confront so that they can transition from the heavy defense and security burden that they were encountering through their budget process, and devote those resources to developing their own economies, to providing greater opportunities for their own citizens. So those are important elements. And then I also wanted to mention, as Ken did, the growth of GCC relations with India, and the effect that that's had on Pakistani security considerations, that in fact, the willingness of the GCC states to take very clearly pro-Pakistan positions vis-a-vis India is much less today than it used to be. And therefore that has an effect on how much room Pakistan has to really push on those issues. And then the last element of that is the expansion of BRICS and the significance of BRICS from a Pakistani perspective, because you now have with the invitation of Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Iran to join the BRICS alignment, you now have both Pakistan's key allies as well as its key adversaries all joining together as an organization that excludes Pakistan. So adversaries to the west and the east, allies to the north and the south, and Pakistan does not have a seat at that table. And how that is going to play out in terms of Pakistani calculations is something that is going to be important going forward. And so, while all of these change the challenges and the threat perception that Pakistan might encounter, it also offers Pakistan significant possibilities, significant opportunities to transition its own perspective and its own priorities in terms of its relationships with the GCC, away from the former security, political, and financial assistance dependency relationships, and begin to think about possibilities for expanding economic cooperation. The Saudi Arabia and the UAE are now critical partners for Pakistan in terms of generating foreign direct investment. The US was the most significant partner on FDI up until quite recently. It's diminished now. China, of course, is a major economic partner for Pakistan, but the Pakistanis, like many other states in the global south, are concerned about the rising debt load to China, since most of Chinese investment is on the basis of loans, not grants. And Saudi Arabia and UAE willingness to invest in Pakistan as a way of not only making up for the shortcomings of US FDI, it's also a way of balancing out their concerns about growing economic dependence on China. And so we saw that both Saudi Arabia and the UAE have pledged about $5 billion in direct investment into Pakistani industry going forward. There's some discussion about Saudi Arabia, Saudi Aramco building a major oil refinery at Gwadar on the Persian Gulf, and other opportunities in agriculture and sciences and other high tech investments that they might make, and also that there are opportunities going back the other way for Pakistani businesses and industries to participate in some of these major economic developments that we're seeing in the Gulf, particularly Saudi Vision 2030, the gigantic NEOM project, and some of the other areas where Pakistani businesses might be quite competitive and might be willing to provide goods and services. So we've seen that Pakistan and the GCC signed a free trade agreement about a year ago, and that's going to be a vehicle that they could use to accelerate and expand economic cooperation. And a lot of Pakistani observers and analysts will argue that this kind of economic cooperation is really the future for Pakistan GCC relations, this is really the way they should move forward. Two other very quick points. One is that the other positive aspect for Pakistan in terms of the reduced regional tensions, or at least the reduction of tensions between the GCC and Iran. It doesn't mean that overall tensions are reduced. Is that it takes Pakistan out from the middle of the Iran GCC, the Iran Saudi adversarial relationship, which has always been a bit problematic for Pakistan in the sense that they have a 900-kilometer long border with Iran. They have a large Shia population of their own, which they've always been concerned about their loyalty to Pakistan and the ability of the Iranians to exacerbate internal tensions within Pakistan. And yet they had this critical security relationship with the Saudis. So to a certain extent, seeing Saudi and Iran moving forward and cooperating, at least in reducing tensions and focusing on diplomacy, means that Pakistan is no longer facing the same kind of security challenge that they were before. And it also opens up possibilities for Pakistan-Iran trade, for example, in the completion of the Iran-Pakistan gas pipeline, some other projects that have been on hold for many years because of these political challenges. And so again, that's an opportunity for Pakistan to really look at ways that it can grow and develop its own economic opportunities and possibilities by these changes in the regional dynamic. And then the last point that I wanted to make, because I know that we're going to be talking more about Turkey, and that is just to make the point that the Turkish-Pakistani relationship, again, extremely historic, goes back to the Caliphate movement during World War I, where a number of British Indian Muslims supported the Ottoman Empire and traveled to Istanbul to support the Ottomans in their fight against the Allies, and continued on to what became the Baghdad Pact, and then CENTO after World War II has continued, and the Turkish-Pakistani relationship remains extremely important for both parties. They have a lot of political and economic similarities. The strained civilian military relationship that both Turkey and Pakistan have experienced over the years of their independence is something that they have worked on, brought them together. Turkey has been also an important economic partner for Pakistan. And to the extent that the Turkish relationship with the GCC has improved over these past couple of years, has also meant that it opens up additional possibilities for Pakistan to triangulate the relationship with the GCC and Turkey. So let me stop there.
All right, thank you very much. That was. All right, that was another really great segue. And I think what was really interesting, kind of talking about India and Pakistan and how changing ideological makeup of those countries, especially leadership, how we change their foreign policies, as the example of India. And we cannot have a better example than this in the example of Turkey and the strongman. And we have Professor Yavuz, who is actually working on Erdogan occasionally, wrote a book. And he will tell us now how Turkey fits into this very complex, not so equation.
Well, thank you. Thanks again for the invitation. Turkey is, I would say, maybe unlike other two countries, it has multiple identities. If you look at Turkey from China, you would consider Turkey as a European country. If you look at Turkey from Germany, you would say it's the Middle Eastern country. So what you have in the case of Turkey, multiple identities. And I think Turkish foreign policy very much manifests this multiple identities of the country. It is a leading member of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Turkey wants to join the European Union. It is a candidate country. Turkey, member of NATO since 1955. And just this month, Turkey applied to become a member of the BRICS, the new trade zone of China, India, Russia, Brazil, and South Africa. So you have multiple identities, yet I would say modern history of Turkey is a story of the tension between Turkey wants to become a member of the European community or to be recognized as European country, as a secular entity or secular nation state. This was the dream of the founding fathers of the republic. Mustafa Kemal and his people around him, they had a vision somewhat similar to Nehru or Ben Gurion. They had a secular enlightenment-based nation state formation. But that dream in the case of India, in the case of Israel, and also in the case of Turkey, I would say is dead. Now you have these oppressed identities coming out with anger and I would say also this desire for revenge in the case of India, Israel, and Turkey. What you have in the case of Turkey, I would say Islamic identity. Turkey is a nation of nationalities. By nation of nationalities, what I mean, even though usually we say 85% of Turkey Turks and 15% Kurds, but if you go and try to examine the Kurds and Turks, you will see Bosnians, Albanians, Pomak, Turkish, different Muslim groups coming from the Balkans and Caucasus. So Turkey, in a way, is a nation of nationalities created and formed by refugees coming from the Balkans and Caucasus. And what was the common glue of this new nation was Islam. In a sense, Islam has always been the glue or the cement of contemporary or historic Turkey. That is one of the critical aspects, but the founding fathers, they try to redefine the cement as national secular Turkish identity. That project, I would say, in many cases, not only in Turkey, somewhat collapsed. What we have is a new leader, a new counter identity that is represented by Erdogan. So let me say, because Erdogan represents the other side of Turkey. One was represented by Mustafa Kemal. It was a European-looking kind of identity and vision. Whereas in the case of Erdogan, he wants to redefine. He doesn't want to recreate the Turkish identity on the basis of the European model, but he claims that he can discover Turkish identity in the past, in the history, in the glory of the Ottoman Empire. So what we have here, this nostalgia for the Ottoman Empire is also very powerful ideological motivation for contemporary Turkish political elite. So they see themselves as the voice of this Muslim Ummah. And I think sociologically, there is a fact that the Muslims globally, they feel that they are under siege. This sense is very powerful. And Erdogan, I was in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, they said, say whatever you want, but do not say a single critical statement about Erdogan. And in Baku, I was in Baku in Azerbaijan, they said the same thing. Don't mention your new book, which is critical about Erdogan. I wrote about his political biography. They said you can say whatever you want. You can even criticize İlham Aliyev, the president, but please do not say a single word critical of Erdogan. It goes along with your survey, Professor Tanaka's survey, that the Turkey is not only popular in Indonesia, Malaysia, Erdogan, but it is also very popular among the young Arab youth. And in the Saudi survey, the Egyptian survey, in many other Arab countries as well, the Erdogan is the popular leader who challenges American hegemony and to stand against Israel policies. This is the perception, both in Malaysia, Indonesia, and also in different parts of, including in France, among the Muslims coming from Algeria and Morocco. I'm talking about the youth living in the banlieues, in the cities around the major towns in France, and the most popular political leader is Erdogan. So now, on one hand, economy, Turkey is the 18th largest economy in the world. But Erdogan, Turkish economy is right now in very bad shape, but Erdogan has soft power. Soft power in terms of speech and becoming the voice of the oppressed. And Turkish universities are also has large number of students from mostly from Muslim countries in Africa, Asia, and different parts of the world. So what we are seeing here is that one of the critical soft power of Erdogan is Islam, and the Istanbul in a way has been a center of Muslim Brotherhood TVs, publications, activities, and literature. I just wrote a report, it is available online, for King Faisal Center. We had a workshop there about the Muslim Brotherhood, and I examined Muslim Brotherhood high school publications, TV stations in Istanbul. So Turkey, again, plays these multiple roles. On one hand, it is a European country. On the other hand, it is an Asian country. So this Turkish foreign policy, one might argue that the Turkish foreign policy is nothing but to search for identity, or some might call it a crisis of identity. But I don't see it as a crisis of identity, but rather what we are seeing is that Turkey is trying to play these multiple identities to expand its influence, both economic, cultural, and political influence, both in Asia, Europe, and Africa as well, because Turkey is also militarily engaged in a number of African countries at the same time. Now, when we look at Turkey's policy toward Asia, for Erdogan, Asia represents the future of Turkey. This is how he sees. Whereas the relations with Europe represents the past of the Republican era or the Kemalist period. So, but not only this is the vision of Erdogan, but there is also at the sociological level, there is a transformation as well. That the Turkish youth, I would say, what we see more nationalists, more Islamists, and there is also China and Russia are more popular in Turkey than United States. It used to be, Russia used to be the #1 enemy when I was in high school, but now #1 enemy in the surveys, United States, and it had to do with two factors. One, US support for the state of Israel. Second, it had to do with the US support for the Kurdish groups in Syria and Iraq, in both places. So these are the two factors, but I would say the first factor, because Erdogan is now, he is very active in the Palestinian case, and Turkey also joined the International Court of Justice, the case of genocide against Israel, together with South Africa, but Turkey also joined with the Gambia, another case against the Myanmar of the persecution of Muslims over there. So what we have in Turkey's Asia policy, from Turkish perspective, Asia consists of 5 zones. One is the Central Asia. These are Turkic republics, and Turkey shares the same cultural, historic, and ethnic, linguistic connection. And as nationalism is going up in Turkey, there is also this desire by the government to develop and deepen these relations with Central Asian Turkish republics, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Azerbaijan. And there are also Turkic autonomous regions inside Russian Federation. One of the most prominent one is Tatarstan, which is one of the most advanced and developed part of contemporary Russia. So with the Central Asian republics, Turkey is used to be, there are 3 stages of Turkish policy at the end of the Cold War. When the Cold War ended, there was a pressure by the United States that Turkey to lead the Central Asian republics as a role model in terms of secularism, democracy, and market economy. And that policy under Turgut Özal, it did in fact have a major legacy, and it shaped to create this institutional connection, especially at the educational level. But then after the Özal, the relations somewhat, the Russia managed to become more dominant. I would say since 2000, what we are seeing, some of the Central Asian republics, especially Kazakhstan, wants to deepen the relations with Turkey, and Kazakhstan also wants to deepen the relation with China against Russia, because of the Russian minority in Kazakhstan is somewhat large. So there is an organization of Turkic states. It consists of Kazakhstan, Turkey, Azerbaijan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Hungary are observant, because Oban, he sees himself more as a Turk. I don't know what, but there are some factors there because of the language, but the Hungary is also very much active. But this organization of Turkic states, I think is so important for Turkey for the cultural reason. It also helps Turkey's identity issue as well. To consolidate this Turkish identity domestically, Turkish identity had some problems inside the country under challenge, but with this foreign policy reach, Turkey wants to consolidate and rebuild that Turkic dimension of its identity. From Turkish perspective, the most important country in Asia is Russia. And the trade with Russia is around $85 billion between Turkey and Russia. Russia is now one of the most popular country in Turkey because of the easy to visit Russia. Russians easily come to Turkey as well. There is a societal level of exchange and lots of marriages as well, because the Turkish men, they like the Russian ladies. And they got, yes, indeed, they come from there too. So you have this a societal level interactions are deepening with the Russia, and but Russia is not very comfortable with these Turks as well. There is also this skepticism. On one hand, there's a lots of trade, some reported, some unreported due to sanctions, but there is also this the shadow of the past, the history. It also plays an important role. From Turkish perspective, the third zone of Asia, how they see it is China. And even though China is very aggressive and oppressive toward Uyghurs, the Turkic minority there, Erdogan is, and also the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, very much silent. Not they are very outspoken on this issue as well. But the trade with China is around $75 billion. So China is the second Asian country in Turkey in terms of the trade. The Turkey's third largest trade partner in Asia is India, but only $10 billion. The trade with Kazakhstan is $6 billion. So India and Turkey, because of the Kashmir problem and because of Turkey's engagement to defend Muslim rights in India, but Turkey is not very comfortable when India said anything about the Kurdish issue inside Turkey as well. But Turkey is somewhat more active, and this creates some tension with India as well. There is another zone which is, I would say, very important for Turkey when it comes to Asia, what I call it a Muslim zone. The largest Muslim country is Indonesia, Malaysia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and somewhat Erdogan has managed to rebuild this historical memory of the Caliphate, that if there is going to be any country to lead the Ummah, this is, I was shocked to see this in Malaysia because Malaysia, Indonesia is never been part of the Ottoman Empire. But there is the sense you can feel in the Asian Muslim zone of the Indonesia, Malaysia, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. They look at Turkey, especially Erdogan, as the leader of oppressed Muslim, or Turkey, a country, if they are oppressed, if they have problem, they can easily move and live there as well, or send their children. So there is this perception and image of Turkey as well. To conclude, Turkey is again, these multiple identities provide opportunities and constraints as well for Turkey. But what we see is that the Turkish public moved away from the West. Turkey was one of the most loyal members of NATO. Turkey had excellent relations with the United States during the Cold War, even after the Cold War. But I would say since 2014, Turkey's relation with the United States, Turkey disengaging, or to a great degree disengaged itself from the West, and now seeks to deepen its relations with China, Russia, and other Asian countries. I will end there. Thank you.
Not to get into domestic politics, but I think this whole notion of make blank great again is at the kind of part of what we are talking about, right? In the example of India, you have Hindu supremacist Modi, you have, it's very kind of supported by RSS. In Turkey, you have Erdogan. We don't talk about much, but Erdogan is actually part of a very ultranationalist, I would call it fascist party that actually is part of his coalition, which we don't talk about. We always talk about Islam, but we don't talk about Turkish nationalism, which is kind of, we talk about the Muslim extremism, but we don't talk about Hindu extremism, right? Which is becoming increasingly a problem. So we have very similar kind of trajectories here. Perhaps Pakistan had Imran Khan, maybe things would have been kind of different. But you have the founding fathers of those countries. It started very differently. And as we see with Modi and Erdogan, who could be really good friends, and if they just drop Islam and Hinduism and we change the roles or the place of those religions in their sentences and can bring Orban and he can drop his Christianity, they will talk about the same issues. But how this changes this region and their politics is really interesting, right? And Israel becomes and Palestine question in the example of India becomes kind of a place to maybe look to see how this is shaping those countries. So I will not take too much time, but I want to really again draw our attention to this kind of muscular policy as Ambassador Juster kind of draw our attention to, and this strategic autonomy, which is becoming part of Turkish politics as well. The world is bigger than five. We are going to make our own policies. Then with the West, we are going back to a pivot to Asia again is part of there too. But I want to bring China into this. What Ambassador Juster was talking about, how this Indian-Israeli rapprochement, right, changes the relationship. And I want to see what is your perspective on kind of China and the Middle East, and how kind of India's relations with the Middle East is reshaping their relations with China, or is it reshaping their relations with China? Because China played a significant role bringing Saudis and Iranians together. So I wanted to see you can bring China into India and Middle East relations, if possible.
Well, thank you for that question. I think India's relationship with China is changing its role with the relations in the Middle East as opposed to vice versa. As I said, in the ideal world for India, it would be a multipolar world. China would be a pole, Russia would be a pole, the United States and India would play within that framework. But India has tried to have never had a warm relationship with China since their war in 1962. I think right after independence, Nehru thought that he would have a kinship with the Chinese. They'd both be these new countries, post-imperial countries that would work together. But then China invaded India in 62. They had a war. And since then, they've tried to work out sort of modus operandi for how to patrol their undefined border. They have a 2,000+ mile undefined border in the north. It's called the line of actual control. And they felt they had a setup for how to have patrols on both sides of the border, but not get in a conflict, and to compartmentalize that aspect of their relationship and to develop economic relations in a positive way otherwise. They had some disruptions in the 2010 to 20 timeframe, and particularly in 2017, there was a standoff in the Doklam region where India, Bhutan, and China come together. And it was a very strategic area for India because this is a small parcel of land that overlooks the sliver that connects the subcontinent with the part of India that's on the eastern side of Bangladesh. But they were able to resolve that, and then they set up these informal summits between Modi and Xi, in which Modi thought that the relationship was under control. And he, all politicians think that they have the ability to manage a situation. And the Indians felt that the relationship with China was stabilized, and their economic trade, India basically has been fluctuating between China and the United States as its leading trade partner in terms of goods. When you add goods and services in the United States, is well ahead. And then, quite to the shock of India, in 2020, the Chinese changed from doing some exercises in Tibet. They took a 90-degree turn and with 50,000 troops and heavy artillery made incursions into this disputed area and even into Indian territory. And since then, they've had about 50,000 troops on either side. The Indians have quickly responded to the Chinese incursion, facing off against each other. They tried to disengage, so there's no immediate other problem, but there was in June 2020, the first fighting that occurred in 45 years, and over 20 Indian troops were killed, and at least 4 Chinese were. And since then, they've had 20+ rounds of military talks to try to disengage. And ultimately, India would like to have a situation where it doesn't have to have that type of manpower in the region, and they could somewhat normalize the relation, but the trust is gone. And so India has looked in other ways to try to enhance some of the strategic partnerships, not just the United States. We've had very warm relationships since 2000, and that's continued to build, but it's certainly accelerated even further after these Chinese activities. And you've seen India as I said when I was speaking, sort of increased its engagement with the US and its alignment and regional architecture in the region of the Middle East. And in a sense, no one says this overtly, but whether it's the Quad grouping to East Asia, the I2U2 in West Asia, the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, these are all responses to trying to create an architecture of economic prosperity and eventually even security that is a counterbalance to what China is trying to do with the Belt and Road Initiative and with its own expanded economic relations. So in a sense, I would say the India relationship with China has accelerated some of these other strategic partnerships rather than the other way around. That's also just Prime Minister Modi's broader vision of India's role in the world now as a leading power and its desire to have broader sets of relationships and to diversify and also to maintain its own strategic autonomy. But I think you see them doing some of this to have an alternative set of connectivity, infrastructure development, and broader relationships.
Just another short question. How is Israeli Indian rapprochement plays into the new dynamics of the Middle East?
Well, again, I think a lot will depend on what ultimately happens in Gaza and whether there is a Israeli-Saudi Arabia normalization. Israel and India have a strategic partnership for defense purposes, for technology purposes, for counterterrorism purposes, for both feeling they're wrongly threatened by Islamic extremism. So there's a lot that goes on there regardless, but that will be further deepened if there's also a broader Israeli normalization with the countries of the Gulf, which partly has to be done with the Abraham Accords. Obviously, if the Gaza situation spirals out of control and we have broader, a wider war with Hezbollah, maybe even with Iran, it's not clear as to where some of these new relationships are going to go. So that still remains to be seen. But right now, India is trying to create with the United States architectures in East Asia, in West Asia, and elsewhere that will provide sort of the rules of the road for the future. And that's really the struggle we're involved with.
All right, thank you. I have another question for our other ambassadors. I've always been curious about the role of Pakistan in the Gulf. Is Pakistan a strategic partner for GCC or a mercenary state there?
Is there a difference? No, I think that, that Pakistan is, as we discussed, I mean, there are certain foundational elements that draw, Pakistan and the GCC states together. So, it's not simply a mercenary relationship. I think that there is, some real, unanimity of vision of history, of tradition, that's there, that is the basis for the relationship. But there's no question that historically, Pakistan has been the demandeur in the relationship. That Pakistan has been the country that relied on the importance of Saudi Arabia, the financial strength of Saudi, UAE, Qatar to a certain extent, the ability of those states to really provide critical financial assistance when it was needed. The Saudis historically selling concessional oil to Pakistan. And so all of those things are there and they have been important in keeping Pakistan afloat. But at the same time, Pakistan has provided critical security assistance to the GCC states, particularly in the post-1979 era when there was real worry in the Gulf about Iranian intentions, about Iranian intervention in the internal affairs in Bahrain and, the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, elsewhere, where the Iranians were clearly fishing, in troubled waters. And so, the ability of Pakistan to provide, necessary, military and security, relationships at a time where those states could not provide themselves, right? There was no real Saudi or Emirati or other military capability. So the Pakistanis filled a gap, that to a certain extent the GCC has now been able to fill itself. Yeah, I would say that it's real, it's not simply a mercenary
All
relationship.
right, thank you. My last question to Dr. Yavuz is because you mentioned Iran Revolution, and I wanted to ask you a question about Iran and Turkey. How Turkish-Iranian rivalry is shaping kind of West Asia and Turkey in Central Asia, because you are also an expert in Central Asia and you did a lot of research there.
Well, I think Turkey's relation with Iran is not much tension. The border between the two countries more or less shaped in the 17th century during the Safavid and the Ottoman Empire. I think there is a deepening trade, but there is also rivalry between two countries over the leadership of Ummah, but I think Turkey is much more active and more advanced in terms of these international networks in Africa, Asia, Europe as well, in terms of penetrating different Islamic organizations and networks. The Iranian influence in Central Asia is only, I would say, very limited to Tajikistan. Turkey has more to offer than Iran culturally in terms of soft power, economic power as well. I don't, and there's also, I would say, new cooperation, military cooperation emerging between Turkey and Iran because of the situation in the region and in Syria. Even though they are supporting different sides, but there is because they both worry about Kurdish issue, and there is a coordination and cooperation between the two countries. I think the relations are not bad, but it is not perfect. But the current president of Iran is Azerbaijani, so we will see what will be his impact, because 20 or 30% of Iranian population, they are Azeri Turks. And after the Karabakh war in Azerbaijan, there is this new rise of Azeri nationalism, both in Azerbaijan and also in Iran as well. And Turkey is trying to navigate this situation as well. So, and Iran so far, it goes along with Turkey. I don't see not much problem. And also Iran supported when Turkey has now permanent military base in Qatar. Saudis and others, they were very uncomfortable, but Iran was very supportive of it. And so there is more understanding, but now the Saudis also, they don't make it a big issue anymore, but still it is there, the Turkish military presence, yes.
All right. Thank you very much, and I think we can open the floor for questions. All right, because we have a question here. Let's start with you, sir.
Well, just is it on?
We can hear you.
Just to start, just to clarify something that some of the folks here may not be aware of, Ummah is the definition of Ummah, to my belief, is the Muslim world as a whole, the community of the Muslim world as a whole. That's what Ummah means. And so that's what Erdogan is trying to lead on. My question is about, it should have been MENA instead of Middle East, because we have the Middle East and North Africa. In North Africa, it's 5 countries, to my knowledge, maybe 6, and they have relationships with the Eastern Asia as a whole. And so, like in particular, the most important one, well, the second most important one of those five after Egypt is Algeria. And I would like any one of you three gentlemen to tackle that question and talk about the relationship of China in particular, that is Pakistan and Turkey as well, with those North African countries.
Let's answer the question and then go, because otherwise we'll have too many questions without an answer. So who would like to go?
China and North Africa. I would just say that China and North Africa is primarily economic, particularly with Morocco. That the Chinese have big investments, for example, in the port in Tangier, and use that as a major transshipment port for Africa, for other destinations in Europe. But they do not, well, you would ask that you were including Egypt in the North Africa category, and of course, Egypt is an important partner for China. I think, well, we've seen, and perhaps Professor Tanaka referred to the significant role that the Chinese are playing in providing military sales and support to Egypt, and also, you know, to the extent that the Chinese see the Red Sea as a critical element of their Belt and Road Initiative, as a critical part of their overall economic security, they would want to have a strong relationship with Egypt and access to the Suez Canal. So there's that. But in terms of Algeria, there's not much in terms of, for example, sales, oil or gas sales to China. It's not a significant thing. Tunisia, not. Libya, you know, there's some Chinese interest in Libya, but not terrible. We can we have our Libya expert here who can talk about that later on. And then Morocco is primarily economic, and they're important there.
Thank you. Let's go to our third ambassador here.
One thing we haven't heard from this panel is a discussion of the nuclear issue as it relates to these states, their nuclear ambitions, and also how they feel about proliferation in the Middle East, not just Iran, but also perhaps the Saudis and Emiratis.
Should Ambassador Justin?
Well, a couple of points. First, people sometimes forget that India, China, and Pakistan are all nuclear states that are contiguous. You know, India has 2 nuclear states on its borders, so it really is a potentially explosive region. And there was a concern when the Chinese came over the line of actual control in 2020 that that might start some sort of broader nuclear exchange. And when Pakistani groups came across into India in 2019, and there was a terrorist incident that killed 40 Indians in the Pulwama region of Jammu and Kashmir, and that led to an Indian response in Balakot to Pakistan proper, where they dropped some bombs. And the Pakistanis came back across the Indian border and shot down an Indian plane. The next several days, both sides were moving their nuclear weapons. Now, some of that happens routinely, so you don't have them sitting in one particular area, but each was very concerned that there was going to be a nuclear exchange. India itself has not been increasing its nuclear weapons capabilities in terms of numbers, to the degree that the Chinese now are doing it very extensively. I'm less certain as to the situation in Pakistan, but there's always a concern about whether the Pakistani nuclear weapons are even safe because of the sort of tumult in the region. So from an Indian perspective, I think they would not want to see nuclear weapons proliferate further, and they would not want to see it happen in Iran. India, at one point, wanted a nuclear-free world. I don't know how realistic they feel that is now, but they certainly would be against the broader spread of nuclear weapons, but they're very, whether it be to Iran and to Saudi Arabia and to others, but they're very focused on their neighboring countries that have it, and that's a very big threat to them, and they may need to start reevaluating their own nuclear doctrine in light of the increasing Chinese numbers overall.
I have a question at the back.
Can I add one thing?
Sure.
Turkey is very active in Libya, I would say. Libya so far main power broker. And now Turkey has good relation with Egypt as well. Now Sisi and Erdogan, they are trying to shape the Libya, the government there. So we will see what's going to come out. But Turkey has been very active there. About the nuclear weapons, the Iran has this desire. And Turkey is also under Erdogan. He made it very public that Turkey must have nuclear weapons. What I know a little bit from some of the military people, Turkey has been quite engaged with Pakistan. And so they say it will not be a big problem to get it from Pakistan. And also what there is this also North Korean dimension of the missiles, because they do much better job in terms of the technology. And Pakistan and Turkey is also working together over the missiles, but some of the technology is coming from different parts of the countries. But there is, I think Erdogan, the current leader of Turkey, is very determined to make Turkey as a nuclear country. This is what he wants to do. So,
Yeah, there's been, just, one sentence, intervention. There's been speculation actually going back for decades that, the Saudis helped finance, the development of the Pakistan nuclear capability. And some sense, and, certainly not proven, but there's certainly a sense that in some way Pakistan has provided Saudi Arabia with nuclear guarantees, and if Saudi Arabia is attacked with a nuclear weapon, that Pakistan would respond. So, that aspect of the relationship is out there. There's also, of course, fairly well established that Aku Khan, who was the main, Pakistani criminal, who kind of proliferated. One man proliferation band, was responsible for some of the development of Iran's nuclear capabilities, particularly on the enrichment side. So.
Microphones are working now. I'm very curious about Viktor Orban. The Hungarians have gone rogue, and there's a lot of discussion about him being Turkish, and I would like to hear where that's coming from. That's a sort of a minor question, and perhaps Dr. Yavuz can help enlighten us on that. But I have another question for the panelists here. I mean, if you look at the relationship between India, Pakistan, and the Gulf, there are a lot of migrant workers. And, and none of you said anything about these very large populations, that are going back and forth.
We did, we both did.
Well, you both did. Okay, well, let's go back and think more about that. I mean, what effect does that have on, in linking culturally, economically, politically, these regions? And for Dr. Yavuz, and for all of you, these countries have pretty large diaspora. The Turks have a large diaspora in Europe in particular. We've got lots of South Asians in America, many, probably hundreds of thousands of them here in Dallas-Fort Worth. So I'm just curious if the diaspora have any role at all in these relationships between Asia and the Middle East. Thank you.
2 points. First, let me talk about the United States, where there are over 5 million Indian Americans, and I think it has a very significant role. I think that it's often said that countries don't have friends, they just have interests, but I think the United States and India also have friends. I remember that one Indian minister I met with told me that her most important investments were in the United States. And I wondered whether they owned Amazon stock or Apple or Google, and he said, no, my children. And so that's an important sort of secret sauce to the relationship. It doesn't mean that the two countries are gonna see eye to eye on every issue, but it does smooth out some of the bumps that come up. In the Gulf region, I was alluding to the fact there are 8 to 9 million Indians that are work there. Now, it's not the same as the United States. They're not citizens of those countries, and they don't have that same relationship. But it has certainly made India much more sensitive to the importance of its relations with these countries because of the economic aspect of it. And so that's been a plus reason as to why India has started to think, and Modi in particular has focused on Indians outside of India, has started to think that they need to have a broader strategic relationship with these countries. That's not, of course, the only reason, but it's added impetus to the direction of their policy. And India has always been very concerned if there's ever any unrest in the region about how to extract those people, and that's a high priority. And as I even mentioned, when Modi went to Qatar, getting 8 Indians who had been sentenced to life sentences, getting them released. So it is an important element that factors into Indian foreign policy.
Yeah, and, I would say that, the Pakistani diaspora in the United States is large, but it's not nearly as large as the Indian diaspora. And I don't think that they have been as effective, politically, as the Indian diaspora. I don't think that they're as unified. And one of the things about the Indian diaspora was always that, regardless of what their ideas were about the situation back home, their ability to work together in order to advance common U.S.-Indian objectives in the United States has been pretty impressive, actually.
Including getting civil nuclear deal done.
Indeed. So the Pakistanis have not been able historically to compete with that, although they're getting better at it. In terms of guest workers in the region, and let me just say that the one exception to your point about Indian guest workers in the GCC is Oman, where a very substantial part of the Oman economic elite is Indian. And where a number of families, leading families in Oman, that do have dual nationalities between India and Oman, and that's a very important aspect of Omani foreign policy is the relationship with India. That goes back actually to historic times. The Pakistani diaspora, the working workers in the GCC, about 5 million. About $20 billion in remittances on an annual basis, which is about the cost of Pakistani imports. So the role that those remittances play in terms of Pakistani economic stability are critical. And where we go forward from here, for the most part, Pakistani guest workers in the region are unskilled or lower skilled workers, not a lot of highly skilled and therefore vulnerable to price competition, whether lower cost populations, Bangladeshis, Nepalis, others are willing to come and take those jobs as something that's significant, as well as the rise of economic nationalism and the need to take care of young populations in the GCC states themselves is going to put pressure on these guest workers.
Thank you. Well, Turkey is of course the other country with large immigrant population. So let's not talk much about that, but do the Orban so that we have more questions.
Hungary.
We gotta have Orban here.
Yes, because he says, let me read, when they ask him, his answer was Hungarians consider themselves late descendant of Attila of Hun, Turkic origin. And the Hungarian is a relative of Turkic language. This is his response. There is some tension inside the Hungary over their ethnic origin. And Orban, he wants to argue that the Hungarians are coming from the Huns. the Turkic group moved from Central Asia to Russia, all the way Europe. And the Hungarian language is Uralic language group. It is close to Finnish and Estonian and Turkic as well. These languages are, their structure are similar.
It's also an Asian strategy to have pivot into Europe.
That's the second, the Eastern opening, what the Hungarian government says with this membership observer status, they want to open to East. Turkey has large diasporas in Europe and especially in Germany. And there are a number of Turks also in the federal German government, very active. Their role in Turkish politics is, I would say, increasing because they are supportive of Erdogan, very much the Turks in Germany, especially.
It's also very much like Modi, Erdogan's kind of going.
Indeed,
Yeah.
mobilizing these diasporas, not only in Germany, but almost all the Muslim diasporas in Europe. Erdogan is quite active in terms of the religious mosque building, standing imams. And Turkey has been, I would say, owns more mosques than any other country in Europe today, including in the United States too. In Washington, there is a huge Turkish complex, not only one mosque, but a huge complex built by Erdogan. It is Turkish government building.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm afraid we'll have one more question. I know there were many hands, but we don't have too much time, so go ahead.
A country you have not mentioned, and not for the normal and usual reason. I want to know about the role of minerals, especially lithium, with regard to Afghanistan, to China, and to the rest of the Middle East and West and East and Asia complex. Thank you.
So this is the question about the possibility of having $1 trillion worth of lithium in Afghanistan, right?
And there are other minerals too, but that's the main.
But lithium
mineral.
is the main,
Which for those who
in
don't
Afghanistan,
know,
there's the possibility of Afghanistan, if possible, becoming the next Saudi Arabia source with the rare earth minerals, right?
and also for those who don't know, this is a mineral that is necessary for our energy transition, at least as far as we know now. Okay.
Anybody's willing to answer?
Good luck getting it out.
No, but I have that question for you.
But if nobody's willing to answer, I will just say, if it's true, it will definitely reshape the energy and strategic network of the region. How to get out, American troops, when they were there, as you know, they had US Geological Survey with them, and so we knew it. But it depended in very remote areas of Afghanistan, difficult to access. But Chinese are very active there, and when people told them it's very difficult to access, they were like, it takes 6 months. So so this is going to be, if true, very big change. But I will end here. I've been warned by our very capable hands here that we need to go get some coffee or tea. Thank you very much all, but thanks.